Hey everyone, welcome to the program WRSA Radio. I am your host, Grenadier One. As always, I hope you are having a good week. As most of you noticed, I didn't put out a show last week due to the purchase of my home, closing on my new home. Everything went well. We're on our way to getting out of the blast radius of Atlanta, which is much of a relief that it's so much of a relief I can't tell you. So the show over the next couple of weeks might not be very long or terribly in depth. Just to forewarn you, I guess that's me kind of making excuses ahead of time. I guess if I lay an egg over the next couple of shows, but it's the reality of the situation. You guys know, I assume, how much a move can do to you. Mentally and physically, it can be very draining. So, just saying, don't get your expectations up too high over the next couple of shows, and you won't be let down. So, with all that said, let's get into the show. So this week, as I watched the events and read articles at the mothership and other places and posts on Gab, I felt like I needed to jump back into the Ukraine situation because we've had some rather major changes that I think need to be spoken on. I'm going to say something that only a few of you out there will probably agree with, which is fine. It stimulates conversation, and I may not be right too. So, but anyway. I believe that Ukraine just won the war with Russia. Now, let me qualify that statement because it is a significant departure from what I believed would be the outcome of this, and it requires that we kind of quantify what constitutes victory here. So, I believe that victory for Ukraine is stated as maintaining independence, maintaining a significant amount of their original territory, and maintaining the current leadership in control. And I think almost any results that have those factors in place is a victory for them. I think that is how they will define victory. And from what has happened this week or so, I think all of those bullet points will be in place when this is all said and done. And so I think you have to come down on this as being a victory for Ukraine. Now, that would still leave a lot of questions about the post-war Ukraine and that we would have to speculate on and what the fallout could eventually see, a shift in leadership or alliances and so forth. But for the immediate situation, I think they have achieved a victory. Now, I would call it a minor victory, but only because the situation on the Eastern Front is still undecided. But I'll get to that in just a little bit. If you don't know why I would say this, let me give you a quote from history. Napoleon said, "When you set out to take Vienna, take Vienna." Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the Russians made it very clear in the opening hours of their invasion that they intended to take control of Kyiv. And it looked very much like they wanted to grab both of the airports around the city, fly in follow-on forces with an air bridge, and use those to quickly secure the routes of access around the capital. And then their ground forces would drive in very quickly to support that effort and complete the encirclement. And it looked like that, that would have allowed them to contain the political leadership in the inside of that encirclement, and ideally for them compel the leadership to surrender. Now, none of that happened. That entire portion of their attack has been a debacle. And it has resulted in heavy losses in at least equipment. We don't know what the casualties have been, but it's looking more and more like it's in excess of 10,000 killed and several times that in wounded and missing. There are some reliable sources that are through video and pictures. They have identified several hundred tanks and several hundred armored vehicles, along with many soft-skinned vehicles as well, destroyed. This is significant any way you slice it, and in fact, it's significant enough that the Russians have ended their drive on Kyiv. And then they characterize the shift in focus and redeployment of their forces in a positive way, of course. And in some ways that may not be sugarcoating it. It may be reality. But the overall conduct of the invasion, it could be presented by the Russians in a way that characterizes the push on Kyiv as a massive raid or a diversionary attack. And that seems to be kind of the take that a lot of the Russia bros are throwing out there. But the problem with that is if we, isolate and look at just that portion of the invasion, it has no qualities that support that being the case. It was a long-range drive in depth into the country accompanied by a 40-mile logistic train to support it. And when your raid involves such significant numbers and results in such high losses, it's very difficult to spin it as being anything other than a main effort operation. It stops being a raid and becomes an attack in force. I would have expected to see a very different approach to the operation had it been purely a diversionary effort, something that would have looked like, or at least resembled maybe an updated version of the Thunder Runs that were conducted by the U.S. Army in Iraq. Those were battalion-sized maneuver elements that just drove through the city and destroyed every Iraqi unit they could find, but they didn't stay and fight. They just drove through the city and then came back out. And I would have expected something that was sort of like take that and update it and modernize it for your capabilities and utilize it. But we didn't see anything like that. I don't see that being reality here, that this was a diversion. It's very clear that this was, perhaps it's a secondary effort by the Russians. And in other words, it was something that they were hoping to have to accomplish and hoping to achieve. But they were intending to accomplish it. They were not just trying to hold Ukrainian forces around the capital and prevent them from moving east to support the defense there. They wanted to encircle that city and force, complete capitulation. Now that's not going to happen. The Russians are repositioning their forces east and have ended that effort to take the city. That's a victory in everyone's book outside of the pro-Russia camp. And this is the real kicker here. Recall that I said and have said before on episodes that perception is everything here. This is the key event and how this is going to be, going from here on out. Prior to this, it looked for all the world like a foregone conclusion that the Russians would crush Ukraine, and it would be foolish for any country outside of those two combatants to seriously consider siding with Ukraine. Now, you can call it false flags and fake news and propaganda, and in many ways you'd be spot on, but as we have said, that doesn't matter in information war. The Ukrainians have been and continue to win the information war, and it is now going to pay off for them. It's increasingly likely that they will not only stop this effort around Kyiv, but continue to develop on that and stop the efforts of the Russians to gobble up the large amounts of territory in the east, which includes some major gas fields that were recently discovered east of the Dnieper River there. The change here that has occurred is that Ukraine now looks like a winner. Other nations will now see that backing Ukraine is likely to lead to victory, and they will increasingly feel the pressure of holding out on NATO. Before they could say, well, look, why risk getting on the bad side of Russia when these guys are going to lose this thing, anyway? Not so anymore. Now Ukraine is in control of momentum, at least as it's viewed, from the outside. And more nations will give in and support them. And indeed, we are already seeing that happen. Poland and Slovakia approved the transfer of tanks and air defense systems, respectively, there to Ukraine just yesterday, I believe it was. And those things are already starting to roll. More and more support will come in for them, and this will start to snowball in their favor. Now, keep in mind here, just because my view of this shifting does not, it doesn't mean that I like the results or I approve of it or I support the defeat of Russia in this. I very much support the defeat of Globo Homo, and I wanted that to be, happen here. But it's looking more and more like the Russians are, changing it over into face-saving mode and moving to grab as much key territory as they can, and then they're going to call it a day, and that's really extremely disappointing. When I look back at how I looked at this event, I said, well, I kind of wanted to see Russia get a bloody nose just to kind of thwart everybody's opinion of them. I think some of the Russia bros go a little too far in thinking that the Russians are too capable or more capable than they really are. But I also wanted them to come out on top of this because I think Globo Homo needed to be taken down a few notches, But that's always the risk with this effort. If you're not as ready as you think you are and you're not as tested as you need to be to undertake these kinds of geopolitical operations, then you run the risk of significantly reducing your standing in the eyes of the world. And you can spin things for people who support you, and it'll be fine, but the people who see you as an enemy will wring as much political capital out of it as they can. And it will become an example of failure that they go to again and again and again to beat you with it. And we only have to see, our own sad ending in Afghanistan as an example of this. That's exactly what has happened to us. Well, at least our government here in the United States. Now, there are two separate types of those are two separate types of conflicts, though. I'm not comparing Afghanistan to this, just how it was used to label the government. But at this point, I think even if Russia grabs a corridor to Crimea and holds on to that water source that the Ukrainians had dammed up, they had dammed up the rivers that were flowing down and providing water to Crimea. I think even if they do that, they're still going to be labeled as failures by the rest of the world. To use a sports analogy, it doesn't matter if you're the better team, the one with more experience and the better players. If at the end of the game, the underdog team has more points than you do, they win. And you could debate it for years and years about, did the underdog team win it or did the better team choke or lose it? But the record is going to say that a win was a win. It doesn't matter. I know that may not sit well with everyone here, and I get that. Like I said, I don't necessarily like it either because I shudder for what this will mean in the near-term future. But I think that's what we're going to have to look at. I suspect that this will lead to more and more emboldened action by Globo Homo, and we could see some very far-ranging downstream effects from this. But that's a whole nother show. I've touched on it a little bit, but that's a whole nother conversation to have. Now, it's not over yet, so maybe there's still more to come that might significantly alter the outcome of this. But I just have to look at what is on the ground right now, and it looks very much like Ukraine will be in a position to move troops east and drive back the Russians in areas where they've stalled out. They'll get more and more support from the outside of the country, and Russia may be lucky to hold on to what they already have, and we'll have to see. Again, you see so much conflicting information that comes out that it's very difficult to really assess what is reality and what is really going on. But I think anybody who takes an objective look at this can say that this has been an absolute disaster for Russia, regardless of what the outcome is. We can expect to see more of this information war and more of this being used to drive home the idea of the Russians being war criminals, and I don't buy any of that stuff, but nor do I dismiss the idea that the Russians are somehow, above these things. Keep in mind that there are elements of the Russian force that are not really directly under control of Moscow, meaning there are Chechen forces here as well as forces from the Donbass that while they're allied to Russia and they're in the organizations, they're not necessarily directly subordinate to Russian military officers and leadership. And it's entirely possible that these elements have committed acts that we could call criminal. And I don't really like that war crime terminology. I think it gets thrown around far too much, but it is what it is. That's, again, part of that information war. So, but also recall that there are at least 2 acts of shooting civilians by Russian military units that are caught on drone video. These are confirmed. These are civilian deaths of at least one man on a bicycle who was shot at by Russian airborne tanks, and there's no question they're the only ones using those tanks. There's none of those in Ukraine. And then there's a couple that were in a car that were killed by Russian forces, and that car and the area of the shooting were found this week. It was around Irpin. As the Russians were withdrawing, they left the burned bodies of this man and his wife and their car still there, along with some other vehicles and bodies there. So all that's confirmed. Now, it doesn't mean that all of those other attacks on civilians are true and confirmed as the Western media is reporting. It just means that the Russian forces are not above this, okay? It happens. And remember that our own forces are not above this either. We have similar videos that came out of Iraq and Afghanistan of our troops killing civilians in what we would call them accidental events. So it's an accident for us, but it's a war crime for the Russians. So I probably come down on a different mind, about these things than most people. But I'll tell you, that for me, I have no expectations of safety in a war zone. Throughout all of history, when war breaks out, safety and security retreat into the shadows. They go there to hide with truth too, but I digress. So no one can expect that, if an army is clashing in your neighborhood, that you can just casually carry on as if they're not there. The dude riding the bicycle that got shot by the tank, what were you thinking? Projectiles have no allegiance. They will kill and maim whatever's on their business end, and that includes women and children. It doesn't matter. It happens. It is part of the fabric of conflict, and while we surely should do our best to limit it, and we damn sure do not want it to be deliberate, we cannot expect that throughout the course of events that it will not happen. It's just there. It is an ever-present thing. I don't hold the Russians in any more negative light for these things. And honestly, I can't hold the Ukrainians in a negative light for it either. They both have killed civilians via indiscriminate artillery fires and missile attacks. It's been going on there for many years. As a matter of fact, they both carry the burden of that. And I think we should remember that when, so many accusations are flying back and forth of, faults and misinformation regarding these dead civilians. The fact that they are dead is enough alone to provide an example of who the real victims of this conflict are. There should be some shame on both sides for trying to make their deaths a part of this information war that is just so vigorously taking place. But we all know that's not how Globo Homo works. So the more innocent the victim, the more mileage they can get out in the press. So, and they're not above faking things either. So of course we cannot accept what they say at face value, but neither can we accept BS from the side that we're supposedly supporting, or that we are supporting either. So that's the thing that kind of irritates me the most here, is the Russians had an opportunity to step into the front and kind of lead the way forward. If they had simply been more forthcoming and more open about who they were, how they were conducting things, how they were operating, I think a coup, they could have had a huge moment here if they had maybe brought in reporters from Western media like BBC, Der Spiegel, some of these bigger Western, Reuters, something like that. I wouldn't have gone to U.S. media, but European media at least. Brought them in and embed them with their units the way that the U.S. Army did in Iraq. That, That move by the U.S. military was groundbreaking, and it won the information war in that conflict. Now, they could have controlled the release of the information to make sure that it was, scrubbed of operational details and things like that. But had Western media been dropped in with them, they could have shown the world that they were telling the truth and that they were being more honest and more open, even more than the West is. In the least, it would have gone a very long way to counter the efforts of the Ukrainian government media. Okay, they would have had, never known when a Western media reporter might have been on the other side of a fight with the Russians, and so they would have been far less likely to have crafted a narrative. They would have had a lot of trouble. They wouldn't have been able to just create some of the stuff that out of thin air. There could have been a counter to that. But anyway, what could have been? I guess you could say. At any rate, that's all I got time for this week, folks. Like and subscribe. Come give me some feedback over on Gab. I'd love to hear from you on this, hear your thoughts. While you're at it, go read some of the items from this week over on the mothership. It's been good stuff, as always, from Concerned American. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next episode.